Hello, everyone. Are we still alive? Can I get a little applause of aliveness right now? Thank you. And if you think I did that for you, I did it for me, because I was up at 5 to catch a flight this morning. Before I get into it, just very, very quickly, so who here is this their first AR in action, out of curiosity? Amazing. And anyone else who's been to multiple AR in actions? Strong crowd also. And who, among the entire group, came here today and learned something that they didn't know before? That's pretty rad. So can I get one more final applause for the fact that everyone managed to come here with a purpose and learn something? And a thank you to John for bringing us all together to do it. So as John mentioned, my name's Jacob Loewenstein, and I want to talk to you about what AR needs to grow up. And based on the presentation that came before me, which was fabulous, we know that there's a lot that needs to happen for AR to grow up. So as John mentioned, I used to be a grad student here at MIT. I got my MBA from the Sloan School. When I was here, I co-founded what was originally VR at MIT, and then when I came to my senses, VR AR at MIT, which still exists today. And that encompasses the entire campus, including the Sloan School, the Media Lab, Course 6, and every department in between. I don't forget about you, other courses. I still love you. And I want to just begin with an honest, just sort of organic aside, which is when I think about back in 2015, what started as an honest conversation between me and one other student, in which we said, well, it seems like there's a groundswell of interest in immersive technology, in 3D interfaces. Maybe we can help support that in new ways. Grew to a club that includes on its email list hundreds and hundreds of people around both MIT and Boston. An organization that helps contribute to and helped co-organize the Reality Virtually Hackathon, which is held here and founded by our very own Steve Patterson, who's somewhere in the room. You would know him by his nicely aged leather jacket. And within that period of time, we did things like holding MIT's first VR AR official course that we taught during IAP. And so while I both appreciate the history that people have been exploring AR for a while, I'm also just overwhelmed in the progress we've made in the last couple of years, validated by the fact that this room has been standing room only for the entire day. And since I left MIT, I had the pleasure of joining Samsung Next. As some of you know, Samsung is a small Korean startup that produces something like 2 TVs every second. And if you don't believe that, I didn't either, but it's apparently true. So industrial progress is nuts. And Samsung Next is Samsung's software and services innovation arm. So you think Samsung normally, usually think hardware. But what I work on in Samsung Next is actually all the software and services that you use that hardware for. And I want to begin by telling you a little bit about Samsung Next and what we do. I will closely measure how far your eyes roll back into your head as I go through this portion of the presentation. But then I promise you we'll get to talking about AR very, very quickly. So just to begin, we invest in companies. So we're a corporate venture fund. You might have read in TechCrunch back in January that we launched a $150 million fund to invest in emerging technologies. And that's translated to us investing in all sorts of companies. In the immersive space, we invest in companies like Baobab or 8i. But our purview is pretty wide. This week, we recently announced our investment in a company, Unbabel, which works on translation and is based in Europe. And in addition to investing in companies, we acquire and partner with companies, right? So sometimes we want to go big, and so we'll buy a company and bring them within Samsung, which you might remember in 2016, we bought Viv from the founders and creators of Siri, and that's technology that's key to our own AI and personal assistant stack. And then lastly, we develop products. And so we recently hired a new SVP of product from Google for Business, Travis Bogard. And we're going to be doing a lot more internal product development moving forward. And so if you're an engineer or designer and you're interested in working on really interesting emerging tech from within Samsung Next, let's keep talking. And throughout all these 3 functions, throughout investing, acquisitions, internal development, we focus on emerging tech. So I focus on VR and AR, but it's not limited to that. It includes all sorts of wonderfully buzzword-tastic things like blockchain and distributed computing, edge and cloud computing, autonomous vehicles, identity, security, health. The bottom line is in areas of emerging tech, Samsung Next wants to be a player. And lastly, we're based all over the world. So you might say well, hey, I don't live in New York, which is where I'm based, or San Francisco. Can I work with Samsung Next? And the answer is yes. We're located in the Bay Area, New York, Berlin, Tel Aviv, Korea. The point is that if you're an innovator working on new technology anywhere, we want to talk to you, we want to partner with you. And I want to impress that the emphasis of this talk and what I'm ultimately going to come to at the end of it is entirely about what everyone sitting over here and what I and Samsung Next can do together. Because without the people in this room working on these products and pushing research forward, nothing useful or interesting is going to happen. And so I think I just want to check the pulse. OK, someone back in the corner is officially passed out. I think we can end this portion of the talk and start getting into AR. So my talk today breaks down into 3 simple sections. So firstly, I want to look back in history and recognize that building an incredible product is a long road. Then, with that historical grounding, I want to talk about AR and why the AR that all of us imagine and that we're dreaming of is actually insanely hard to do, not impossible, just hard. And thirdly, I want to talk about and conclude with, well, given how hard it is, what can we actually do to make it happen? And so to begin, I want to take us back a couple of months to the last AR in action, which now I know a bunch of you attended, so I'm going to hold you accountable to what I talked about last time. But last time, I talked about platforms all the way down and the importance of strategy to determining who the winner was going to be in mobile AR. But today, I want to focus less on pitting one company or another, partially influenced by the fact that I now work for one of those companies. And instead, I want to focus on how all of the companies trying to solve AR and make it a mass medium all have to deal with the same problems. And for this end product that they're all envisioning, they're all going to have to confront and climb over the same hurdles. So today I want to focus on how building an incredible product is a really long road. What is required? What's required to build an incredible product is tons of money and investment, lots of R&D, incredible talent basically banging their head against a wall, and perhaps above all else, time. Time to experiment, time to fail, time to iterate, and ultimately, at that very last second, when you probably think it's all for naught, come to an incredible conclusion, produce the thing that people really want to use. But don't take my word for it. I want to talk about history. So first, I want to take you all the way back to 1995. Hip-hop was still big, and there was a video that didn't play. Fabulous. And in 1995, if this is going to go. No? In 1995, streaming video wasn't great either. So this is a very method way of demonstrating this. Is the internet connection enabled within PowerPoint, or it should be on autoplay? That's weird. Well, I also don't really mind winging it. But in 1995, the first mass market smartphone was released. And if you looked at this thing, and I will try now to pantomime, I've taken an improv class, so here it is. But it was pretty large. The battery life was not particularly long. It had a black and white screen. You needed to use a stylus to go and interact with it. It didn't have touchscreen. And in terms of core apps that you could use for it, you couldn't really do that much. You could use your calculator, you could make phone calls, but it wasn't ultimately really that useful. Now, I appreciate, as someone who works in technology, that having a product like that in 1995 is an incredible accomplishment. It was a product of years of work and very, very smart people helping making it happen. And yet, 1995 wasn't when the smartphone took over. Now, I want to fast forward 13 years. In 2008, Samsung released its first smartphone. And if you look at what the difference was, it went from a form factor this big to something much smaller. It was in color. It had a touch screen. You could watch videos on it. You could store things on it. And so in a very short 13 years, you went from the introduction of a first product all the way to it finally overcoming enough hurdles that it could resonate with the market and begin to solicit adoption. And so why was that? What needed to happen in those 13 years? Well, first, Moore's law needed to do its thing, right? There's an inevitability, which is to say that processors needed to become faster to actually sustain and enable the functionality that we were looking for. And there was a set timeline. Things could only progress as quickly as they could progress. And those processors also need to become small as well. So you want to cram lots of transistors into a processor and then make it really, really small so you don't have to literally carry around a computer. On top of that, UI and UX needed to become more intuitive. So the first smartphone required a stylus. Frankly, I'm willing to bet that most people who picked it up would not have immediately known how to use it. They probably had to look at a user manual. And anything that requires time to learn how to do means that there's plenty of time for you to drop it, get bored with it, and just say, honestly, it's not worth it, on to the next thing. And yet 13 years later and beyond, you had a new mobile interface which anyone could basically pick up and pretty much figure out how to use without needing to even ask, right? It's very intuitive to say, if I want to move on from information, I'm going to push it or swipe it left and right. It's very intuitive to say, if I want to make an image better, I'm going to stretch it or shrink it. And so it took years of thinking in order to come up with this more intuitive interface. And then lastly, data needed to be set free, right? So what I mean by this is that firstly, it needed to become easier to transfer data wirelessly from one place to another. Part of that was infrastructure development. Internet speeds needed to become faster and more widely available. And then part of that was being able to move both storage and computing into the cloud, to say that not everything needs to happen on the device itself, but rather it could happen elsewhere. You could stream from elsewhere and actually just watch the end product on your phone. And with those three innovations in 13 very short years, a bar mitzvah's worth of time, we were able to go from a product that was an incredible technological accomplishment, but not something that consumers wanted, to something that every consumer everywhere wanted. So why do I bring this up? Well, I bring this up because I want to provide some historical context for what we're trying to do to AR, with AR. And so the AR that we all want is really, really hard to do. So this is today. So today we have AR, a Samsung S8, pointed out, scanning a room, right? Using AR Cloud, an incredible core piece of software provided by our partners, Google. And after about 2 seconds, maybe, all of a sudden an incredible 3D object appears, as if it were in the real world. And again, as a technologist, I can appreciate that this is an insane accomplishment. We basically already had several talks today that have let us know how much research went into accomplishing even just this. It's insane. Between 1995 and 2017, we went from a paperweight of a smartphone to a phone that, to some degree, can actually understand its environment. It can say that's a flat surface and put something in it. That's pretty incredible. But we also know there are limitations, right? We know that it can basically only detect horizontal planes, especially if they're not white. We know that it doesn't detect vertical planes. We discussed a lot of the problems before. Can't handle things like occlusion if I want to put something behind it. Can't interact with the environment. If I have a chair there and a virtual cat, the cat doesn't know it can go and necessarily climb up on that chair. So if virtual cats can't happen in this medium, certainly isn't good enough yet. So where do we all want to go from here? We want to go to tomorrow. It's actually from the slightly dystopic short film Hyperreality, which I think I get a Groupon or prize if I include it in the presentation, because I think there's a club now of those that do it. And while I realize that a lot of people cite this as sort of a pretty scary example of the future, I think putting aside some of the terrors, we both recognize that within that scary future, there's something actually very exciting, which is AR that travels with you, can bring it on a bus, becomes ubiquitous. I can look around and read my text anywhere. Interactive, whether gestural or through some other interface, I can interact and control it. And it basically is my viewpoint, my pure interface through all sorts of functionality that I want to access. It becomes literally the computing medium for me, whether it's checking my mail or my calendar or anything. And so AR truly becomes the computing platform and not something I do on the side of other platforms. And so in order to get to this dream vision of AR, right, which seems pretty far away from what we have today, a whole tech stack basically needs to be built and perfected in order to make this happen. So first, we need to get the hardware right. We need faster processors, better depth sensing cameras. We need even more precise IMUs, and we need to get all these sensors to work together. We need better core software, right? We need to do better at tracking and mapping. We need to do better at object segmentation and identification to understand the environment. And in the last talk right before this, we talked about the AR cloud, right? We need to get better at moving some of the functionality into the cloud that we need both to shrink the form factor and to ensure things like persistence, that an object that I put in the world stays there, and consistence, right? Consistency. That what I look at is the same as what someone else looks at because we're both indexing from the same AR cloud, the same point cloud. We're both looking at things as if they were on the same coordinate plane. Then we need to get the optics better. If my memory serves me right, Barmack came and talked about optics, right? We had a literal genius beaming in, though we had to change rooms, in order to tell us what we need to change in optics. Better waveguides, better compression, right? In order to take down some of the rigorous computing necessary to make things appear as if they're really there. And even employing technologies like eye tracking, right? We talked about waveguides, but what if you could beam something directly into someone's eyes and not need to produce a light field because you knew exactly where they were looking at all times? We need tools. We need to make it easier to create 3D objects, animate them, and then ultimately have some sort of final tool set so we can take these objects and animations and put them to some framework for people to use, whether it's an app or something else. And then lastly, tools aside, you need the app layer itself. You need some functionality that people want to use. And you need, going back to UI and UX, like prescriptive, recognizable norms of UI and UX that someone could enter an AR app or pick it up and instantly know what to do. So there's a whole stack we have to build. It's no really easy task. And once you build the stack, everything needs to work perfectly together. So together, in fact, you might say it's like a marching band moonwalking like Michael Jackson. It's probably as difficult. If you're trying to achieve sensor fusion and the IMU and camera are not properly integrated and they're not giving you the same picture, your AR is not going to look good. And that's even today. And if we talk about making things integrated all the way up the stack, the difficulty just ratchets up and up and up. Even if everything's integrated and works well together, it can't feel like you're wearing a computer on your head. Because if you're wearing something heavy on your head, no matter how incredible the experience is, you're going to feel some impulse to want to take it off. It won't be a ubiquitous computing platform. It'll be something that is a gimmick, something that you'll put on sometime. And that makes AR a passing fancy and not the new paradigm for computing. And so now that we've established that you have these hurdles you need to overcome even when you build the stack, the next question is, thank you, how do we actually then get past this and make it happen? So staring at the stack, I'm going to now give you some maybe secret info. No, it's not secret info. But what I want to do is, because I'm so excited about working with you and because my job is essentially to work with entrepreneurs and researchers for us to collectively make this happen, I want to talk about 3 specific areas that Samsung Next is looking at that if you're working on, please come and talk to us. And I also want to tell you a bit about some startups we've already invested in those areas to give you an idea of kind of where we're at already. So first and foremost, object segmentation and recognition, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. And so we're really interested in getting better at looking out into the world and not just seeing a sparse or dense point cloud and having no idea what it is, but actually being able to piece out when you have a chair, a wall, or anything in the environment. Because the AR that we're really excited about that we see is an AR in which you could begin to create a degree of dynamism and interactivity in the environment. And in order to do that, you need to know what's in the environment. And so one company we've invested in is Broadman 17, a startup in Israel that's developed a computer vision object recognition that basically enables you to do object recognition on even very low-powered chips. And so you can empower vehicles, for example, to use Broadman 17 technology to drive around and know when they're approaching a car or when they're approaching an object in their environment. And so we've already begun investing in this technology for a wide range of applications. And so we're looking to connect with companies and entrepreneurs that are helping take this and apply it even more specifically in AR. The next thing we're looking at is rendering compression and optimization and moving some of that into cloud computing. And so what I mean by this is that we talked about not wanting to wear a computer on your head, right? We talked about not wanting to carry around a really heavy smartphone. The form factor is really important. And while we believe that we're going to continue to see shrinking chipsets, and you're going to be able to compress more and more computing power into your headset, if that is in fact the form factor that eventually manifests, it's going to reach probably a point where you're not necessarily going to be able to do it to make things as small as you want to. And so we think that the solution to this is actually moving some of the computing off into either the edge or the cloud. And in order to do this in a very, into an efficient way, you need to both reduce the computing load itself, so getting good at compression and optimization, and then be able to actually execute on it in the cloud and transmit the end result back to the device itself. And so we've invested in a company, Liquid Sky, that uses this very same technology, not for VR and AR, but for AAA games, so that anyone could basically play a AAA game on their phone or their laptop. It doesn't matter. You don't need a console or a tower anymore, because the computing power can be elsewhere, and all you need is the screen and the input to play it where you are. And so we invested Loewenstein. We're looking for more companies and more entrepreneurs working in this vein to help apply this sort of thinking and technology for VR and AR. And then thirdly, mentioned before, we're looking for tools for creating content and really, really ingenious UI and UX. And so the idea here is there's a little bit of an intersection. We believe that when people are really going to start using AR, it's not just going to be for some like low-hanging fruit applications that we believe, yes, it's very clear why you want to overlay information in order to make this better. We also believe there are going to be UI innovations that we haven't even thought of, in which it's just going to become so much more intuitive for people to compute in AR than it would be through any other medium, right? The swipe left, swipe right effect, where it's just so much easier for me to read or scroll through information on my smartphone, even though there are arguable reasons why it might be better for me to do so on a PC at the same time. And so we're interested in meeting entrepreneurs that are working on applications that leverage really, really visionary UI and UX that are going to make people instantly comfortable with 3D interfaces. And relatedly, we're looking at people building the tool sets to enable those apps, because we think it comes from both ends. It takes both vision for the end product, but also it takes tools that incorporate these emerging norms and emerging best practices and make it really, really easy to implement them. And so we have one more, Spatial. Spatial is an AR company. Spatial is a portfolio company of Samsung that we invested in recently. They're an incredibly impressive startup. Anand Agarwala is one co-founder. He had built BumpTop, which leveraged a skeuomorphic interface. Google bought them back in 2010 and basically explored what would 3D interfaces on 2D surfaces sort of look like. And Jinha Lee, an alum here of the Media Lab, who also worked on sort of a similar problem here in an academic context. And they're exploring just this problem of how do we make AR really, really easy and intuitive to use, and how do we make it actually empower new types of productivity and thinking that you wouldn't be able to pursue through other media. And so they're in stealth mode. I can't tell you a ton about what they're doing, but they're an incredibly sharp group. I'm very excited to work with them. And you should look out for both some of their core apps that they're producing that are going to be coming out, as well as a platform that they're building in that is going to enable other people to build similar types of applications. And so we've talked about 3 big areas that we're focusing on. We talked about 3 startups that we're invested in. This is just the beginning. These are just 3 startups, but we want to go deeper in each area. And so I want to end by sort of just looking out at the audience. I want to ask for a raise of hands. Who here is a researcher or working on product or something really exciting and interesting in AR? I see hands up all around me. So please, text, email, scream, call, throw something at me, get my videos to start working, whatever it is, I'm not going to tell you. But if you want to work on something exciting, building the future of AR, come talk to Samsung next. I'm excited to hear from you and excited to launch this journey together. Thank you so much.